This is Money Talk on News Talk 580 CFRA. Here is John Budden.
Good afternoon, folks. I'm John Budden, and welcome to Money Talk. Here's the lineup for today's show. We start with Dave Sally from the Ottawa Business Journal, and then we go to Andrew Bell and Jameson Burko of our affiliate BNN and take a look at the oil market. After the break, a two-part interview with David Prince, who is the founder of Harbinger Capital Markets Research. And then after the news, my interview with Jeremy Samhita, who is CEO of Stealth Care, and he will discuss cybersecurity. After the final break, we go to Bruce Croxon of our affiliate BNN and his interview with Harley Finkelstein, who is the Chief Operating Officer of Shopify. But first, let's go to Dave Sally at the Ottawa Business Journal. It's great to welcome Dave Sally from the Ottawa Business Journal to Money Talk. How are you, Dave?
I'm pretty good, John. How are you?
I'm okay. I just got back from New Hampshire, and I understand that you were curling yesterday.
Yes, that's right, John. It was a fun game, close. We didn't come out on the winning end, but you know what they say, you can't win them all.
Well, it's getting you through winter, and that's the name of the game.
Absolutely.
Now, Dave, less than a month after software firm Halogen made headlines by being acquired by a California competitor, another significant local tech enterprise announced this past week it's also being sold to an out-of-town company. In other tech news, one of Ottawa's fastest-growing software companies said it posted a dramatic jump in revenues in fiscal 2016.
That's right, John. Well, let's start with fintech firm Telepen Software, which had big news this week. The Ottawa-based company makes digital wallets that allow clients to send and receive money, pay bills, and purchase cellular airtime. The company is making major inroads in the African market, where traditional banking networks aren't as developed, and processes more than 50 million transactions a day. Last Wednesday, Telepen announced it had been acquired by Mississauga-based Volaris Group, a company that buys firms in various sectors with the goal of growing their revenues through talent management and employee development strategies. The firm's website lists a portfolio of more than 30 companies in fields from financial services and agribusiness to transportation and communications. The two firms say there are many synergies between Telepen and Volaris' existing portfolio of communications companies. Telepen says joining that group means that as the company grows, it will have access to a valuable network of potential clients and partners. Telepen has more than 100 employees, many of whom are based in other countries around the world, but the company says the deal will have no impact on its Ottawa workforce. Terms of the deal were not disclosed.
And in other tech news, local software firm Pronto Forms had plenty to cheer about when it announced its fiscal 2016 results on Thursday.
You got it, John. The Ottawa-based company that makes business tools that allow workers to collect and analyze data on mobile devices said it boosted its revenues dramatically in fiscal 2016. The publicly traded firm's full-year revenues increased 28% to $11.8 million. The company's net loss also jumped from $2.6 million in fiscal 2015 to $3.4 million last year. But CEO Alvaro Pombo said that was due in large part to a conscious effort to put more resources into boosting sales productivity and product development. The company also released its fourth quarter results this week. Pronto Forms increased its revenues in the quarter by 10% year over year to $3 million during the 3 months that ended December 31st. Its net loss for the quarter was $1 million. That compares with a loss of $702,975 in the fourth quarter of 2015.
And Dave, what's coming up on OBJ's radar?
Well, John, the monthly Mayor's Breakfast, sponsored by OBJ and the Ottawa Chamber of Commerce, always draws a good crowd. But this Friday's breakfast, well, it might be practically standing room only in its special venue, which is the Horticulture Building at Lansdowne Park. That's because this month's guest is someone hockey fans throughout the capital will be anxious to hear from, NHL Commissioner Gary Bettman. Mr. Bettman, of course, is in town for the celebrations marking the 125th anniversary of the Stanley Cup, And Ottawa hockey fans are no doubt anxious to see if he'll have anything to say about the Senators' anticipated outdoor game at TD Place Stadium later this year. Stay tuned for all the details of Mr. Bettman's talk at obj.ca.
Thank you for a great update. Hope you have a good week, and we'll talk again next Sunday at 2 p.m. Take care.
You too, John. Thanks.
Now to Andrew Bell and Jameson Burko at our affiliate BNN, and they look at the oil market.
What a week it's been for oil and gas. Shell walking away from the oil sands and the oil price dropping below $50 US. So let's see how those key commodities are trading today. Now, oil losing more ground, and it's close now to fresh 3-month lows. We're hearing about heavy oversupply, or worries about that, in the United States, despite those OPEC-led production reductions. And Reuters reporting yesterday that senior Saudi energy officials sat down in a closed-door meeting with the independent U.S. oil firms this week and said, you shouldn't assume that we're going to go on with these output curbs if we see ongoing rising production from the U.S. shale fields. That's two industry sources telling Reuters. They may have had their own little hatchets to grind, but that's the word out there, that the Saudis are getting ticked off as the Americans take advantage of their conceding of market share to increase their own output. Let's check in on copper. It's had about 6 straight days of decline, holding its own today. Workers have begun an indefinite strike at the gigantic Cerro Verde mine in Peru. That's Freeport-McMoran's mine. It's one of the biggest to be opened in recent years. This thing is huge, about 40,000 tons of copper every single month. It's the biggest Peruvian copper mine. And you know that Escondida in Chile has also been hit by strike action. That's a look at what's moving the commodities. The Prime Minister has been pitching to the world's most prestigious energy investors, telling them about the benefits of buying into Canadian oil and gas. But Mr. Trudeau has been avoiding an awkward reality, many energy players abandoning the Canadian sector. Jameson Burko has more, and you've been writing about this on the website, Jameson.
Oh, and there couldn't be a more awkward situation that Trudeau will have to deal with.
Can you imagine?
First Canadian Prime Minister, sitting Prime Minister, to address the CERAWeek conference, and this is the context in which he must speak in Houston as Shell is all but pulling up its stakes. It's unfortunate. Of course, Trudeau did not address that specific deal. As you might imagine, Andy, it doesn't really help his message, which was that investing in Canadian oil and gas makes sense and you all should do a whole lot more of it.
Meanwhile, Shell abandons the oil sands.
If he wanted to put that in context, it would have been quite a challenge. So his choice was to simply avoid the issue. But he wasn't the only senior member of our government who was there, Andy. Our Natural Resources Minister, Jim Carr, was also in Houston, and he did address the issue.
We believe that in the long run, investors will see the Canadian oil and gas industry as a good place to invest as we move over time in transition. And there will be other investors who see Canada, known for its innovation and its entrepreneurship, as a place where an investment makes a lot of sense.
However, there's always a however here, folks. One of this country's most prominent energy investors who spoke with him yesterday, Rafi Tamazian, says that Canada has now become a place where investing in the energy sector actually makes the opposite of sense.
Canada is out of vogue. Canada's investment, international investment in Canada is not something that anybody wants to do. They want to leave. The companies want to leave. The investment community wants to leave, and that's a problem.
Now, I think it's probably in the running there for understatement of the century to say that that's a problem if indeed it is happening. And while there is certainly a debate about whether Mr. Tamazian's position is in fact the consensus, Andy, there is a proliferation of evidence that supports his position. Not just Shell and the decision they made to all but leave the oil sands yesterday. They're simply the latest to do so at the end of last year. Norway's oil giant Statoil completely, we don't have to use any qualifiers there, they are gone from the oil sands. They gave all of their assets to Athabasca Oil. Andy, that was about an $832 billion deal. There was, of course, Total, the French oil giant, tiptoeing backwards from the oil sands over the last several years. In fact, you go back to 2014 when they shelved that $11 billion Jocelyn mine. Even the world's largest energy player, ExxonMobil, completely erased the reserves that they had booked in that $20 billion Kearl mine from their reserves a couple of weeks ago. And of course, while that is largely an accounting issue, it does speak to this strategic change among super majors, that perhaps pumping and adding to reserves, as was traditionally seen as, the way you value these super majors, is what do their reserves say, kind of changing their perspective on that a little bit.
Yeah, of course, they're high-cost barrels, and they're seen as coming with a lot of carbon pollution. In
some of the highest costs in the world, carbon pollution aside.
In the Alberta oil sands.
Okay, folks, stay with us. We'll go to a break, and when we come back, we go to a two-part interview with David Prince, the founder of Harbinger Capital Markets Research. You are listening to 580 CFRA.
You're listening to Money Talk on News Talk 580 CFRA.
Recent strength in the U.S. labor market's pretty much sealed deal on rate hikes. The question is how aggressive will that tightening path be? As money piles into the states, concerns about valuations mount as well. Harbinger's David Prince joins us. Fed funds futures indicate 100% chance that on the Ides of March, we stick a knife in the back of low interest rates.
Yes.
Or at least we start to slowly push it in.
Yeah, the rate should be at 1.5%, given what's going on in the economy in the United States and given the overall level of CPI. So that makes sense. But the fact is, the markets get crazily upset because they hear about rate hikes, and they're unfamiliar with what it used to be at my time when Mr. Volcker went and said overnight 800 basis points overnight type of thing. So, that was a big change, and we're not seeing that yet.
The jobs report backs up that, and there was a huge manufacturing component to it as well, which I suppose is not that much of a surprise.
Well, it is, because I actually went through the numbers afterwards, and I found out that does not include the numbers that have been announced.
Oh.
So they're not included until they're actually employed.
So the American president can't take credit for this report.
He can take partial credit because they were the ones that were announced in November after the election. So they're...
Okay. All right. You say so.
Well, the point being, though, the numbers were really good. This was the area that people thought would not have a recovery, and then what has happened in the last 3 months has been a significant pickup in manufacturing jobs in the United States. So what I'm showing there are the numbers, and the overall numbers in white is what you're seeing in terms of the U.S., and what has to be really observed is the fact that there's no doubt that there is a significant pickup in manufacturing jobs in the United States.
Okay, so blue-collar workers now getting some more cash in their pockets, expected to spend that at the mall. That fuels inflation. That fuels Janet Yellen to pull the trigger more than once.
You've got the story. So to put some perspective on it, in the case of the wages in the United States, they're annualizing going up 2.8%. So that's a hell of a difference from our 1.1, and you can see that obviously that is a factor in determining the Fed actions. And what's happened this week, especially on the news today of that wage increase, the Fed fund futures all the way out 9 months. So my original forecast for 3 additional hikes this year are clearly being embedded in the market as of today. And it will prove to be interesting as we get further economic data.
So if we are now that much more confident that the Americans will raise the cost of borrowing not twice but thrice, what is that doing to the bond markets?
So that's where we get into some funny little shenanigans, because here we are artificially driven out of the European zone because the socialists have decided they need to suppress this. And what's happened to them is the long end of the markets, which historically are ones that the market controls as opposed to the government, without getting into a long harangue about why the ECB bought so many bonds. The reality is we're starting to see long rates in Europe actually going up at a time when the U.S. is going up. So there has been a crazy message that's come from the Draghi message this week, because out of one side of his mouth he said he wants to prolong QE,
right,
and then out of the other side, a hint, hint, nudge, nudge, I'm going to be raising rates later this year. That speaks to a whole bunch of optimism about the economic recovery in Europe, and I'm not that convinced. I know everybody says it's great, get in, but the reality is I look at what's happened in Europe and I think to myself, they keep on stumbling backwards because they keep on falling into a different pit, be it political corruption, political uncertainty, be it trade wars. They have got this ongoing conflict, and especially in a major election year, the uncertainty level should be much higher than what people are looking at when they're investing in Europe.
So is the European recovery already priced into stocks?
A lot of them, yes. And I want to show you that when you look at the European markets, they have been driven, that big move that they've had this year. Now, the white line is the stock 600. The S&P is obviously the S&P 500, and you can see how far it's gone. But where that big lift has occurred are all in the international names that benefit from a strong U.S.
Okay.
So be very careful when you hear guys say it's time to really invest in Europe. What you need to do then is make your mind up about the individuals that are more Eurocentric, not the ones that are benefiting from the U.S.
Well, then if we've gotten a recovery and you're pretty much priced into those stocks already, do we just move a little bit further down the food chain to the emerging markets?
Up the risk scale and down the chain.
Right.
Well, that's exactly what happened this week. People started really going after the emerging markets like crazy. And the only problem with that is we've got this herd mentality that can't stand to be out of anything. And the momentum drivers, unfortunately, are persuading people into stuff that now comes to fruition in the wrong way. And the best example I can make of that is all the expectation was for a big recovery in Brazil. So we can't keep up to the corruption stories on a daily basis, but if there's an honest politician in Brazil, he'll be leaving soon. The problem being that the Brazilian stock market has been driven by foreigners getting into stocks like their big stocks like Vale and big international names. So again, you cannot look necessarily at the individual index and say that reflects the individual economy. And certainly when I look at overall emerging market shares, we've got some weakness that is starting to develop in the Asian shares as well as in some of those developing nations.
So we've got the Bovespa up there, which is a stock index, and then you've got it compared against an exchange-traded fund.
True.
For most Canadians, it's not our day job to be analyzing individual equities, and ETFs are often considered an efficient way to get exposure to any given market.
And in this case, it does do that. If you want to get exposure, but my question always is, why do you want to get exposure to something that is already playing off the U.S. market?
So is there an international area that you like at this point?
The only one that I like is Japan, and that's one we talked about at the beginning of the year. But and the reason I'm liking that is because they are going through that whole change that they've been in for the last 20 or 30 years, that you're starting to see improvement there that's starting to mean that they're spending again. Again, Japan ends up being a better tourist spot for a lot of people than going to the United States this year. Things of that nature will start to be reflected in that economy. I don't need much growth, but certainly growth is better than what they've been dealing with on the deflationary front. That change alone represents some pretty good trading opportunities.
Let's take a break so you can get all riled up about the Dutch. David Prince is our guest, and when we come back, the three biggest things he'll be looking for next week. David Prince is all orange today.
No.
Well, next week he'll be. We've got some things you'll be looking at, including the election in the Netherlands.
Yeah, of course. This is going to be important for a number of reasons. One is clearly this switch to a populist vote, which caught people offside last year. An awful lot of people are hoping that this year what we're going to see is a surprise the other way, and there's going to be a rejection of the populist vote.
Right.
And that's going to be seen on Wednesday next, which is the 15th, which is also the day that we'll find out from Ms. Yellen how far the rates are going, and obviously the 25 basis points are baked in.
The GDP of the Netherlands, $853.5 billion US dollars equivalent, according to this latest reading I'm looking at here. That is a fraction of Canada's economy. So this is clearly not an actual needle mover. It's more of a sentiment mover.
It is absolutely the sentiment, and that's really the big thing because we have both the French and the German elections later this year. And that's sort of what people are looking at, Brexit being an influencer towards the U.S. election, what this election from the Dutch is going to be towards influencing the French and the German elections later this year.
All right. And then closer to that, we do have the U.S. Federal Reserve making that call on Wednesday on interest rates.
Exactly.
So let's revisit that idea that we went from the dot plots told us at the beginning of the year that it was going to be 3 interest rate increases. But everyone said, no, it's most likely only going to be 2. But now we're back to the conversation of 3. Why?
Because simply put, that the American economy had more slack in it than what people thought. And what the numbers that are coming out more recently are proving is, in spite of what people may say, this Trump administration has started to see some results in terms of getting people to actually hire more, do more, commit to more. And what's happening is their belief is that there's going to be an improvement in the U.S. economy.
So when it comes to looking for clues about the number of further rate increases, what within the text will we need to address?
Well, the big thing is what she says about the wages and how much she puts an emphasis, because there is no doubt that she is convinced, and along with the other Fed governors, and certainly some of the other Fed governors were much more hawkish than what she has been over this last 6 months. But the point is that the only part of the equation that was not confirming what the purchasing managers have been saying and what people in the business have been saying, there is a definite shortage of skilled workers in the United States. And we're going to have to start seeing some pricing to be able to attract those people back into the workforce, or any people into the workforce.
How much attention are you going to put on the housing starts data of the U.S., considering February, as we already discussed, much warmer month than we've seen on almost every record in Canada and the United States. So I can imagine it might skew the numbers if it's easier to put a shovel in the dirt.
Well, I think that the big point is that what to me matters is obviously if there's going to be a big pickup in the housing market in the United States, that really influences a whole bunch of our resources here, most notably lumber. What's been happening to the price of lumber in the last 2 weeks is, oh boy, has it ever come off, and I mean come off big. And I'm not sure whether the demand for lumber has subsided because they're building earlier, which you raised a good point, or is it because there's a feeling that something's going to be accomplished out of the softwood lumber? Both cases.
In other words, they're pulling back. They're waiting for the dust to settle. Sawdust to settle.
Okay.
Sorry.
Right. It must be your tie. I'm telling you, it's got to be. That said, I will allow you to get away with that. I think that what's happening is that people are starting to realize that there's going to be some sort of settlement on the dispute, because that's necessary. It's a good start forward in terms of any negotiation on any of NAFTA, and should be done and addressed early. If that's the case, that means that we're going to be able to supply an awful lot, which will suppress that demand.
David, good to have you with us.
Thank you.
David Prince is the founder and president of Harbinger Capital Markets Research.
Stay with us, folks. After the news, my interview with Jeremy Samhita, who is the CEO of Stealth Care. You are listening to 580 CFRA.
Now back to Money Talk on News Talk 580 CFRA.
Well, the topic today is cybersecurity, and I am pleased to welcome Jeremy Samhita, who is CEO at Stealth Care. So glad to have you join us on Money Talk, Jeremy.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it.
I have to ask you for a snapshot of your background and your role at Stealth Care.
Sure, no problem. I have 16 years in information security with a focus on cybersecurity and counterintelligence. I have experience working on clandestine programs with the U.S. Department of Defense, U.S. intelligence community, federal law enforcement, allied foreign governments, and the private sector, helping each of these institutions solve their most challenging issues in cybersecurity and intelligence. Currently, I am the CEO at Stealth Care, and I'm responsible for the growth, strategy, and direction of the firm, along with providing subject matter expertise to our cyber threat intelligence platform. I also consult to boards, directors, law firms, and the C-suite on understanding their cyber risk and how to protect their overall enterprise value.
I have to mention that I first met you at a family office gathering a couple of years ago, and you spoke about cybersecurity to a group of very wealthy families, and you scared the daylights out of me, and I went away alarmed and concerned. Jeremy, what are the major risks your clients face, and how do you as a firm help them?
Sure, good question, John. One of the biggest risks our clients face is the unknown. As high as 46% of cyber attacks are unknown, meaning there is no cure for that attack. Attacks are becoming very intelligent and sophisticated today that conventional products are not adequate alone to protect an enterprise. That's why Stealth Care developed a very intelligent cyber threat intelligence platform that predicts cyber attacks before they occur. It helps our clients see threats over the horizon and become more cyber resilient. We also deal with incident response or post-breach work as well. We've helped our clients with some of the most sophisticated cyber breaches that end up costing millions of dollars to repair the damage. We see lack of education as a major risk as well. One of our fastest growing areas outside of cyber threat intelligence is our reputation and privacy management services. Being able to post or publish something on the internet anonymously is becoming a growing epidemic. We help our clients get the right message out while suppressing negative content. We also help our clients remove unwanted personal information that may be floating on the internet, as well as to mitigate their risk and help with their privacy.
How should governments, universities, institutions, utilities, businesses, individuals, and the list goes on, contend with the immense security threats in the surreal internet-reliant and connected global economy? That's a mouthful.
Yeah, that's a good question. Right now, there's a lot of confusion in the marketplace today as it relates to cyber and cybersecurity. This confusion can cause speculation. Keeping up with the threats today can be a daunting task. I think the fundamental objective amongst these organizations that you've mentioned is to first understand the cyber domain. It has so many moving parts, but with the right people, you can apply singular focus on the issues. Many organizations and the people that run them have the mindset that if I throw $1 million of technology at the problem, they will be safe and secure. That mindset and thinking does not solve the problem because they ultimately don't understand the problem. So the cybersecurity threat landscape should be approached using three main elements: people, processes, and technology. At StealthCare, we listen to our clients and look to solve their challenges through a solution that fits their needs. There is no silver bullet or magical black box that will solve this problem. We do not push specific products because their name sounds cool or they just closed a second round of financing for $50 million. We give an unbiased view and sometimes an unfiltered perspective on the organization's risk. So overall, we look to solve complex problems with practical solutions.
Now, who are your clients? Example, categories, and obviously not names.
Sure. So our clients range from Fortune 500 clients to small family offices and everyone in between around the globe. Because we feel cybersecurity is not a technical issue, but a business one, we have clients in just about every vertical market. So everyone needs cybersecurity. To think you don't need it or that it won't happen to you can get you fired in today's workplace. We do service companies in the financial, retail, healthcare, logistics, B2B, energy, and critical infrastructure areas, both large and small.
During your presentation last year, I remember hearing about the dark web. How does that all fit into this challenge?
Sure. So the dark web, or deep web as it's sometimes referred to as well, is a special place, a special access area of the internet. 80% of it deals with illicit activities that are occurring down in the dark web or the deep web. So a lot of your bad actors, a lot of your hackers, some of your organized hacker group, people developing malware, people developing ransomware are lurking down in the deep dark web, selling these wares. There's a lot of sale of illegal drugs and arms and human trafficking, and there's all sorts of illicit activity that goes on down there. So that is where a lot of planning and preparation and the sale of goods and the sale of source code occurs. So that is one area that we pay special attention to as it relates to cyber threats and cybersecurity and keeping organizations safe.
Now, is there any estimate of the cost to society in general from targeted attacks? I assume it must be immense.
Yeah, so we've heard the cost to be as high as $600 billion when you factor in counterfeit goods, pirated software, personally identifiable information, and intellectual property theft. So the cost is immense. And we've seen in organizations, we've seen their intellectual property, all of their research and development initiatives, all of their intellectual property erode over the course of a couple of days because they've been hit with a cyber breach, all that information has been stolen, and all that R&D is basically has eroded overnight.
Now, I remember a simple example that we were all in a very comfortable room at the Ritz-Carlton in Montreal, and I seem to recall that you had most of the information on our cell phones within minutes at this particular conference.
Yeah, we're using commercially available off-the-shelf software and hardware. Most of it you can obtain in a free version from the internet. There's even tutorials and videos on the internet to show you how to use them. So obtaining that type of information in a public setting, or even a private setting for that matter, can be very easy to obtain. And someone with a little bit of knowledge and a little bit of technical prowess can ascertain that information. So the idea behind that was to demonstrate to people how easy it is in a public setting for a bad actor to intercept data, steal your data, drop a piece of malicious software into your phone or your laptop, and then take control of those machines and ultimately steal the information, steal your online banking information, steal your client information, steal your personal information. All of that is up for grabs when those things occur.
So for people listening, obviously your clients are institutions, governments, and also family offices, which we've discussed. But of course out there you have listeners who are individuals and are very concerned. Do you have any short rules that could apply to somebody who's listening who says, well, I've got to check my system and take care of this before I get hacked?
Sure. There's a couple items I can give, some very practical information that I can certainly give that is readily available to everybody, to the general population, as they move throughout their daily lives with the internet. So one of those being two-factor authentication. Two-factor authentication is a process that allows you to authenticate yourself, typically with a password, and then the system will ask you for a second form of authentication, typically to another device, to ensure that that person is truly you logging into that system. So if you use Gmail or you use, some sort of free email or use Apple or any other type of mainstream product today, typically, or any social media product today, typically they will offer two-factor authentication. It's an added layer of security. It mitigates the risk when it comes to compromising credentials or your username and password. So that's one way. It's called two-factor authentication. Another very practical way to protect your information is to encrypt your data. And you should encrypt your data both at rest, meaning while it's just sitting there on your phone, on your laptop, but also as it's in transit. So that means sending an email, sending a file, that data should be encrypted. Most operating systems, the most common operating systems today, offer a native form of encryption on your hard drive that allows you to encrypt that data. Your phone as well. Some people don't use passwords on their phone, whether it be fingerprint or a 4-digit code. That code or those fingerprints actually encrypt that data. So every time you type in that code, you're decrypting that data. So those are two very fundamental, basic techniques today that you can use that are easy takeaways in order for individuals to protect themselves better.
Now, I would guess that you don't use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or password as your password.
No, typically not. But so, yeah, a good practice for passwords is make them long. The longer you make it, the tougher it is to break. Use symbols, use characters, use capital letters, use numbers, and use a combination of that. Or you can use a long passphrase where, it's something that you can remember. Almost a sentence, a short sentence you can use. Anything that creates complexity to that passphrase, the better off you are.
Now to move back to institutions, governments, and family offices who are your main body of clients, could you give us your coordinates for listeners and also, of course, your website? And I would assume that if people go to your website, they will find some of your articles linked.
Sure. Yeah. So our coordinates, we're based in the U.S. We're based in Cleveland, Ohio. We have teams out in the West Coast and in Oregon as well. We have personnel in Toronto. We have a number of clients in Ontario as well and in Quebec. And we have a team in the EU that we use for time zone purposes for cyber threats and alerts. So we have a global team.
And what is the website address?
Our website is www.stealthcare, STEALTHCARE.com.
Well, it's been a great conversation and very enlightening, and I look forward to talking again soon because we've only touched the surface of this one, and wish you all the best. As they say, take care.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it.
We'll go to the final break, and when we come back, Harley Finkelstein, Chief Operating Officer of Shopify. Stay with us, folks. You are listening to 580 CFRA.
You're listening to Money Talk on News Talk 580 CFRA.
Shopify has stood out as a tech darling in Canada, and its shares are up 250% since going public. And Bruce, you had a chance to speak with Shopify's COO, Harley.
That's right. I've been following Shopify for a long time, as you know. I spoke with Harley Finkelstein a short time ago about the company's recent performance.
A lot's going well. We announced our 2016 earnings, Q4, about $389 million. We now have more than 375,000 merchants on our platform in 175 countries. I think we're focused. We know exactly what we need to do to keep going. We're also thinking about what the future of retail looks like. I think if you ask most people what Shopify does today, they would tell you that Shopify enables you to build an online store. And what we're really thinking about is we want to enable merchants to sell anywhere, whether that's online or offline or through Facebook or through Pinterest or in person. And so we just have a very focused view of where we're going, and we're working hard at that.
So that, at the risk of using an old term, business as usual is for you guys is e-commerce anywhere, right? What about the ancillary services you're starting to offer because of the data you're collecting? Like a personal favorite of mine was always Shopify Capital.
When you think about merchant services in general, what we did is we looked at what were entrepreneurs using that we feel we can provide a better version of. Mm-hmm. So shipping, for example, we felt that we can go to the shipping companies ourselves and negotiate on behalf of 375,000 merchants. That gives them and gives us incredible economies of scale.
And you take a little piece on
That's right. That's exactly right. So payments was the first one we announced. The second one was shipping, and the most recent one is merchant cash advance. But the entire philosophy around these merchant services is how do we further bend the curve to make it easier for entrepreneurs to sell products to the end customer. And we're just looking to figure out where we can add real value. And by doing that, Shopify becomes further and further the center of the business for all of our merchants, and that's what we want to be.
So shipping, merchant advances, are there any other areas that you're really excited about?
There are, and I'm not going to tell you right now.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Soon, TBD.
TBD.
Okay.
But yeah, we're always looking for ways that we can further democratize commerce and give small businesses the same tools that traditionally only the largest companies were able to afford.
Beautiful. One of my most exciting things about Shopify is that you're right here in Canada. Yeah. Head office is still in Canada, Ottawa, in fact. You have a Toronto presence. Are you running into any issues with finding the right amount of talent to be the world-class company you've turned out to be? What's the update there?
Yeah, so just to be clear, so we have an office now in Montreal, we have an office in Ottawa, Waterloo, we have 2 offices now in Toronto. We just opened up a second office in Toronto at 420 Wellington Street, which is an R&D office, so we're going to be doing a lot of new R&D, hiring a lot of engineers here in Toronto, and then we now have a new San Francisco office. In terms of our access to talent, it's never been better. We think the Canadian, not just the Canadian universities, but the Canadian landscape provides us with a ton of talent, particularly people that are really smart, really ambitious. So in terms of access to talent, we're finding great talent here in Canada. And we find the Canadians that we hire have incredible loyalty. They not only come to Shopify, but many of them come to do their life's work at Shopify and stay for a very long time. Yep. And that's getting easier for us.
That's great. So listen, one hint of controversy that I've heard around Shopify, got to talk about it, this whole pressure that you've come under to not provide services to Breitbart News due to the nature of its publication. It's, divided to say the least, mainly con. What's the latest on that? Where does Shopify come down? I know you've said you'll support anybody, but in your own words.
So, a couple things. First of all, Shopify does not advertise on Breitbart. Shopify does not endorse Breitbart. Shopify is a platform. We enable people that want to sell products to sell those products, assuming they're legal. And just like many of the social networks allow you to disseminate information on their social networks, Shopify is a platform. We don't sell any particular products. And as long as you're selling something that is legal, we enable you to do that. But we don't endorse it. A lot of the products that they sell, we don't especially like. But as long as it's legal, we allow that to happen.
And I'm assuming then, by extension, you haven't received a lot of pushback from your customers to say you shouldn't be offering it. And if it was a mass sort of organized response? Would you see it any differently, do you think?
I'm not sure. Look, with 375,000 stores on Shopify, I'm sure you can find products on one of those stores that everyone doesn't really like. And so we're a platform. We don't sell any particular products, and we don't endorse anyone that specifically that sells on Shopify.
Had to get that question in there, didn't you?
Well, yeah. I mean, Derek, our producer, was all over me. Thought I was a puff interview, like I was like singing their praises left, right.
You do love them.
I do. I'm not a shareholder, right? Unfortunately.
Yeah.
I'm not an early investor, unfortunately. But to me, I can't. I mean, these guys, a fantastic service. They keep knocking down the business. They're expanding into totally logical services for SMB, small, medium-sized businesses that they can get cheaper for them than they could get on their own. I mean, yeah, so I had to fish hard for the Breitbart thing, and I loved his answer. We provide a service. We don't make an opinion on what people do for a living. We provide a service.
Your interview with him kind of reminded me about why we talk so much about Shopify, because it's really in the epicenter of what is happening in the retail sector. There's massive disruption, and the big players are having a really difficult time figuring out how to keep up with Amazon. How do I sell my goods online and do it profitably? And then here you have Shopify, this kind of upstart platform that says, I'm going to help anybody build an online store and hopefully try and do it profitably. So that all of a sudden, scale really isn't an advantage.
That's it for Money Talk. Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. I hope you have a good week. We'll be back next Sunday, 2 p.m. I'm John Budden, and you are listening to 580 CFRA.